Are you looking for an experience that will grow your teenagers' faith, increase their leadership skills, and teach them the discernment to engage with the world all around them, all while taking them on the adventure of a lifetime? I mean, who isn't looking for that? If your teenager loves fun, adventure, and wants to grow in their faith and leadership this summer, then send them to Excel's Summer Leadership Camp. Excel's Summer Leadership Camp is a 12-day experience for passionate young leaders looking to discover God's truth, to discern wisely, and live wholeheartedly. Your teenager will embark on a transformative journey in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where they'll build lasting friendships in the context of community, embark on thrilling adventures like camping, rock climbing, whitewater rafting, and they will receive expert training and certifications in categories like CPR and wilderness first aid. Each aspect of the camp is woven together to help them learn to discover truth, to discern wisely, and take godly action in the context of real-life situations. To learn more or begin an application, go to theexcelcamp.org. That's theexcelcamp.org. Hurry, because summer is just around the corner.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reclamation Podcast, where our goal is to help you reclaim good practices for faith and life. My name is Tony, and today is episode 81 of the podcast, and I get to sit down with activist turned movement leader Blythe Hill. Blythe and her organization Dressember has personally changed our lives, as my wife and daughter and I and our entire family have now participated in this movement for several years. My wife's done it for 7 years. I think my daughter's done it for 4. And what I love most about it is the simple yet profound idea: a dress can change the world. In our conversation today, Blythe talks about compassion fatigue. She talks about dealing with trolls. She talks about what it meant to start such a powerful movement and how Dressember is changing the world all over. And it's an incredible conversation. So 2 things I want you to do. I want you to do me a favor and share this episode with a friend. Leave a rating or review wherever you can on iTunes. And also maybe prayerfully consider joining my wife's Dressember team. We're going to put the link in the show notes. You can join her team, be a part of raising awareness for, against sex trafficking and human trafficking and just all the things that the world needs right now. It needs you to stand up and take a stand. So I hope you listen and enjoy this conversation with Blythe and prayerfully consider about how you can get involved. Without any further ado, here's my conversation with Dressember founder Blythe Hill. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm here today with Dressember founder Blythe Hill. Blythe, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I was telling you before we get started that you have been a huge part of our family for a number of years because the work that you do is so important. But I think probably the best place to get started is, can you tell us what Dressember is and how it got started?
Sure. Yeah. So Dressember is an anti-human trafficking nonprofit organization, and our big campaign is an annual style challenge where we invite people to commit to wearing a dress or a tie every day during the month of December. Started with dresses, so dresses in December equals Dressember.
Love it.
In 7 years, we have been able to raise $10 million towards anti-trafficking work around the U.S. and around the world.
So I've listened to you. You have an incredible TED Talk out there that I've listened to, and I've heard you talk about this. One of the things I'm really curious about is how in your life did it really impact you to go from doing this kind of just for fun, and now this is obviously your full-time job plus some, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. How did that transition happen in your life, and then, well, let's just start there.
Yeah, so Dressember was initially just a fun, quirky style challenge. I started it in 2009 while I was in college, and when I turned it into a campaign, that felt really risky because it had been this just fun, light fashion challenge. And here I was adding this really heavy layer to it to see if we could have an impact on an issue that I care about a lot and had been looking for a way to make an impact. So it felt really risky. That was in 2013. And I remember setting, what felt like a really ambitious goal to try to raise $25,000. And we ended up raising that in 3 days.
Woo!
And,
That's
and then
incredible.
then raised 6 times that amount in a month. We raised $165,000. And so at the end of that first month, I remember thinking like, oh, okay, people like this. Like I had been worried for not. And, this is a much bigger idea than I even realized. So at that point, I was working full time in LA and was, kind of a part-time, not a part-time. I was like a volunteer CEO for the next few years, but I registered as a 501c3. And we got that certification in about 9 months. And then it was about 3 years later that I came on as a part-time CEO and transitioned to, I had 2 part-time jobs between Dressember and another sort of admin job that I took on. And then another 2 years, year and a half after that, I was able to come on full-time. So it was a journey. It was, a labor of love, and still is something I am just so passionate about that a lot of times it doesn't feel like work, or I guess I'm not drawing on the same sort of energy reserves for this work as I was for any other job. So, just to be clear, it is a job and it is work. And the whole get a job that you love and you'll never work a day in your life is not really true.
I was going to ask, 7 years is a really long time, and it took you a tremendous amount of time just to get to a place where you could do this full time. How many times, or were there times in the middle where you thought, man, I don't know if I can do this? What do you do when you hit those moments of one of my favorite sayings is the juice worth the squeeze?
That's a good saying. I like that. Yeah, there were a lot of times where I felt that way. I think, for the first 3 years, just wanting and hoping to get to the point where I would get to dedicate a good chunk of my working hours to it. It was never about the money. Clearly, no one goes into a nonprofit work for the money. It was more time, because I was still working full time. And so working on Dressember was just like lunch breaks and weekends and evenings. And I just, I wanted to give it the time and the energy that it needed. So it was mainly like being patient, and kind of trusting, like, okay, we'll get there. I just need to be patient, those first few years. And then the year and a half, 2 years of being a part-time CEO was super hard.
That sounds like the worst, actually, if I can just be really honest. That sounds horrible. It sounds like being a bivocational pastor.
Oh my God.
Right? It's just the worst.
It was awful. Like in the beginning, I was super excited. Like, okay, like it felt like a step towards legitimacy, but it also, I think I had expectations and my board had expectations that weren't realistic of 25 hours in a week, And so that was a really hard season, lots of growing pains for me as a leader and for the board of directors, just really kind of navigating expectations and my role versus their role. A lot of turnover happened in that season kind of all at once with my board, because it was this growing pain, which a lot of organizations go through, of like the initial founding board members to, people who aren't my friends with skills. They're, kind of a level up in terms of like a governing board and a fundraising board, and a little more hands off in a sustainable way. So that was probably one of the hardest seasons that I went through, where, I mean, there was a minute there where I thought I might not be the leader of the organization anymore. You know,
Sure. Yeah.
if the trajectory kind of kept going where, you know, this is my vision and this is the board's vision, I didn't really know how all that was going to shake out. Fortunately, I'm still here. I'm still passionate and still have a really, you know, strong vision for where we're going. And I've got an awesome board and have been able to maintain most of the relationships that I had with the founding board members. And then, yeah, kind of through that season and growing as a leader and learning to handle criticism and the occasional troll that might, you know, have a thing or two to say about what we're doing. There's a lot of learning I had to go through.
Listen, I've been on Dressember's Instagram account, and I've been on your Instagram account, and there's a lot of people have opinions about it, especially in this recent season. It seems like has been especially hard, and so I guess one of the questions I wanted to ask was, how do you deal with the trolls? How do you deal with the hard days that feel like, you know, like it feels so distant from your mission, even, right? Because you know, like trolls are never really like trolling you on how you're stopping human trafficking, right? Like that's which is the core of what you do, right? But it's always about the stuff that's on the peripheral. How do you keep yourself in a healthy place?
Yeah, it's an ongoing discipline for sure. I remember like years ago when, I mean, Dressember's very first campaign year, there was feedback. And
I wish I could have recorded your face when you said feedback. That could be my favorite part of the whole interview.
Oh, man. Yeah. There people had their opinions. And so I had to learn pretty quickly, like, okay, how am I going to navigate this? Because it's not sustainable for me to personalize it as much as I initially did. Where Dressember, I felt so enmeshed with Dressember that, you know, this is my baby and my like the best idea I've ever had. And I did have to, you know, in a healthy way, differentiate myself. Like, okay, when people criticize Dressember, they are not criticizing me personally. If they criticize me personally, that's, you know, a separate approach that I might deal with it. Well, you know, it's all kind of the same, where I learned pretty early on, like, okay, I've got to construct a healthy barrier between me and the outside world. This was super hard in the beginning when I was managing everything, you know, as a one-woman team. Like, I was doing all our social media and using this royal we when I talked about, you know, we at Dressember, it's just me.
It's just me sitting in a room.
Yeah. And I was, you know, answering all the emails to the general inbox. So that was really hard because there was no way to, you know, now we have interns and we have staff who are the ones who are on the front lines of communications, seeing those comments and DMs and emails that might come in, and then escalating to me the ones that are actually worth reviewing.
Sure.
So for, the first year or two, super hard. And then bringing on an intern just to manage emails and social media inbox. That was like the best decision ever. But yeah, I kind of had to, the expression that I learned pretty early on was like, guard the gate.
Yeah.
You know, if you, whether it's like to your heart or your mind, you kind of have this gate, and you, it's almost like in meditation where you like observe the thoughts without judging them.
Yep.
So like, okay, you have this gate and these comments are going by and you can observe them, but you don't absorb them until, you know, in mid-campaign season, I don't want to hear any of them, and I don't want to read any of them unless there's like something really timely that like we need to respond to. And then it's kind of choosing like, you know, okay, well, which what feedback gets in. It's like, is there validity to it, regardless of how it's packaged? It might be a really meanly packaged but valid comment. And so my team does a really great job of obviously, not communicating the mean thing to me, but just like, oh, this is a good point that someone is criticizing this. We just throw away, ignore the comments that are just mean without any valid feedback. So those never make it past the gate. And then the ones that are mean but valid, those ones, are like, okay, this is going to sit outside the gate until, January or February, when I have the space to kind of process this. And then there are comments that are, they're critical, but they're delivered really well. And sure. I really, we really appreciate those. I think feedback, especially from our core people, we want to hear that. And that's another thing I do is like, if there's a comment that I do come across, whether it's valid or not, I look up like that person in our system, if possible, to see like, is this even a person that has a history with us? Because most of the trolls, even if they're like, I'm never donating to your organization again. That's something we see every once in a while. Sure. And then you look them up and they've, sure enough, they've never made a donation to begin with. So there's a lot of fluffy talk that happens. But if someone's making a comment and they're part of our core community, that's the feedback I care most about. So, that's a long answer to what
it's good. It's good. It's good. It's good. I think one of the things that I'm hearing is you do your very best to listen with critical judgment about what needs to be heard and what doesn't. And then your team and you kind of assess from there, is this person, a part of the core group or not? And then how do you move forward from there? And I think that's very good wisdom. I think that's good. What about your daily rhythms? Do you have things that you do, especially during your campaign season, when I imagine that your work turns up to 100? Are there daily things that you do to keep your head and heart in the right place?
Yeah, sure. There's, really simple things that end up being really important, like getting enough sleep and drinking enough water and taking my vitamins. It sounds so like simple, but those things do really keep me on a keep the bottom from falling too low. And then I love music, so I'll listen to like some particular songs, and I am a person of faith, so I spend time in prayer, and I really feel like that helps kind of set intentions and just acts as like a guiding force throughout the day. And then I was doing really well at running since quarantine started, or shelter in place back in March. And I hate running, but it was like, getting out of the house, like it felt just so freeing. And so I had a really good running routine going until a couple weeks ago. The weather in Seattle, where I live now, has kind of turned, and
you grew up in LA though, right? You went from LA to Seattle, is that right?
I actually grew up in Seattle.
Oh,
I grew up north of Seattle in Shoreline, and then moved in high school to Orange County, California, and then moved to LA around 2011. And my husband and my son and I just moved up to Shoreline, my hometown, a couple months ago for my husband to go to grad school at the University of Washington.
That's awesome. And so you didn't have a family when you started this passion project, right?
No. Yeah. I was single.
I'm curious that the follow-up question to that, which is, how has your family been impacted by, how are you managing both now? Because I know, in my line of work, like it's super easy for me to justify spending more time at work, 'cause it's really important work. and the work that you're doing is really important work. What are some of the things that you do to set good, healthy boundaries in your life as a part of those coping and, heart mechanisms?
Yeah, I think it's actually been really healthy for me because I have always been someone who it can be tough for me to get motivated work wise. Like I'm historically a procrastinator and kind of wait until the energy and the feeling strikes me, and then I'm super productive and just ride that energy wave. Which it worked for me for most of my life, but now I have to have very clear work hours and boundaries primarily because of my child, but also the health of my marriage. So it's forced me to really I need to learn to be productive from 9 to 5, none of this after hours energy burst. So I actually think it's been really helpful in some ways. It's been kind of a discipline that I've had to step into. But yeah, I think just setting those work hour boundaries and really showing up for what's in front of me, whether it's the work or my family. There's always work that is undone. But at the same time, I want to be present and I don't want to miss these beautiful days with my 17-month-old son. I just feel the time moving so fast with him.
It's scary how fast it goes. It's super scary. And
feel it.
And at the same time, the work that you're doing is so important. I'm kind of curious, over the last 7 years, you've now kind of become a human trafficking expert. In terms of how to fight it and the partners that you work with, and you guys are really big that you help fuel the partners that are doing all of the work out there. What has that experience been like? Kind of pulling back the curtain. What started as man, this really is a pain I see in the world and it hurts my heart. To now, I mean, I would probably imagine that your email box is filled with information and facts about this all the time. What's that process been like for you?
I love learning. And I mean, it's really humbling to be called an expert, because honestly, I think all that means to me, or I don't know, whether you're talking about an expert or a leader, I think what makes a good leader really is someone who's committed to learning and is not going to get sort of set on one approach or one solution. So for me, it's been just this ongoing learning process, and I see that continuing, and that's exciting to me. Is in the beginning, we thought this was just an issue happening across the world. This wasn't an issue happening here in the US.
Sure.
And so, as we learn, as I learn, as my team learns, as our partners learn, we adjust our approach. So we initially had an exclusively international focus, and now we focus domestically and internationally. As we learned about the incredible, incredible is not the word, but kind of horrifying intersection between foster care and trafficking in the U.S., we adjusted our approach to include foster care advocacy and supporting the foster system. As we learned, and there's a statistic I learned years ago, that the average survivor of trafficking could have had an intervention 7 times before they did.
Wow.
We adjusted our approach to support training for what we call frontline industries, where people would come in contact with victims of trafficking and might not know it because they don't know what to look for. So, Uber and Lyft drivers and truckers and hotel staff really made an effort to, and that continues to this day, to support training for those frontline workers. And now something I'm increasingly interested in is legislation and policy change, and the way that we continue to criminalize victims of trafficking in this country, including children, which you'd think like, okay, for 20 years now, we've had the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, where, by definition, a minor cannot consent to sex, and so is a victim of trafficking, whether they're under control of a pimp or not. And yet we continue to criminalize minors and adults for peripheral crimes that their traffickers make them commit. So that's something. I mean, the number of victims of trafficking currently incarcerated, we hear about Centoya Brown, Crystal Kaiser. There's just a whole host of them.
Sure.
I suspect just tens of thousands of them. And that's heartbreaking to me that we're ignoring those victims.
Yeah, especially when you consider how overworked our court system already is, to add more work on for people who were victimized there to get there in the first place seems asinine to me in a weird way. So how if we're talking about legislations, and this episode is going to release after election day, how important is the way we vote, and how do we find out where politicians stand on these kind of issues, especially given the fact that it seems difficult in today's world to find reliable media? I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, it's super important that we vote. Yes.
Sure. Yes. No, of course. Yes.
Our vote is important. And it's challenging to find out where a candidate stands, because there are candidates who appear to do great things for trafficking.
Yeah.
There's funding for victims of trafficking. But at the same time, when you dig a little deeper, you might find that there's reduced funding in other areas that are super important, like immigrants who are victims of trafficking, or there's the T visa, where if an immigrant is trafficked into the U.S., that they are eligible for a T visa to stay, because they might have been trafficked in as a child, and
sure,
now it's 10 years later, and so are they going to be deported for? We want to protect victims who there's often a number of overlapping crimes, and so if they are scared of being deported, which is a very real threat that a trafficker might make over them, you can't go to the police because you'll just be deported. There is the T visa, or there's, supposed to be the T visa protection. So when you look at some of the current funding going towards victims and safe housing for citizens, but then some of the protections for victims who are immigrants, it's complex, it's complicated,
right.
And it's unfortunately politicized. I mean, and it's on both sides of the aisle. I just reading Kamala Harris, has been a very outspoken advocate of anti-trafficking work, and yet there have been prosecutors under her umbrella who have criminalized minors.
Sure.
Who are victims of trafficking. So it's super complicated. There's no such thing as a perfect candidate or a perfect vote.
Amen to that.
And I think policies and legislation, all that needs to move forward. And then it's like less about who's supporting it. It's like, well, can we all come across the aisle and support a good policy?
Build foundations.
Yeah.
I think you're on mute.
Workday starting to sound the same?
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
So I love what you had to say about learning, and I was really moved, and I want to give your team a lot of props because for a long time, and our family has been with you guys for a long time in terms of this movement. You guys have used the term modern day slavery, and you've recently kind of, I'm going to say backtracked off of it, but have kind of learned some things. And so I'm curious, two questions. If you could talk a little bit about your learnings on this area, and then also what was it like to make such a vulnerable, but just, important statement about what you've learned?
Yeah, that's super fresh, Tony. We
I know.
posted about it yesterday. We're end of October as we're recording. Yeah, this has been an ongoing learning experience for us for like over a year. Speaking of kind of the valid and critical feedback, we began hearing like, hey, you use the term modern day slavery, and you should really consider the impact that has on communities of color, to use that terminology. Is it accurate? Is it triggering? Is it honoring to the history of that community? And so for over a year, we've really been moving away from that language. And at this point, have pretty much wiped all of our website and except for historical blogs, but
Sure.
like our current messaging, we've really removed slavery, enslaved, even abolitionist language from our messaging, which is primarily challenging because so many of our partners use that language. They're doing great work and they're using that messaging. And so it's a little tough because we're saying, okay, this is the choice we have made for our organization. We don't want to shame anyone for using or continuing to use that language at this point. But this is the choice we're making and why. And we're not going to act like we've never said that before.
Of course, right. No,
that brands sometimes do is like, anyway, we will own like, okay, in the past we have used this language, but we are making the decision to move away from that language because there's a number of reasons. When we look at trafficking, the victims of trafficking are primarily and overwhelmingly individuals of color and indigenous communities and LGBTQ. And so I know it's problematic. I'm this white woman who's leading this organization, and to go around kind of toting the language of modern day slavery when historically slavery was a legal institution. It was a legal and highly lucrative institution that much of America is built on.
Of course, yeah.
And then when we're talking about trafficking is illegal everywhere. So these are, just fundamentally two very different institutions. When slavery was legal and defended and upheld for centuries, and with trafficking, apart from traffickers, you're not going to get a lot of pushback on like, legalized trafficking. It's we should regulate it and make it taxable and make traffickers business owners. Like no one's arguing for that. So yeah, we've been examining the differences there and how we might be alienating some of the communities who are most impacted by this issue simply through our language, because language is powerful.
Yeah.
So that's recent decision.
Super recent. I am curious if you've had any, how the feedback has been, if you've gotten any yet, how are your partners responding to all of it? Cause it's, certainly it's a lot.
Yeah. It's super recent. I don't know. Have we posted on Dressember social media yet about it? I know it's on our blog.
You have.
Okay.
You have. Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I know I reposted, Tori, our communications manager, posted on her channel. So I reposted that. I'll have to ask. I kind of wait for the feedback.
Sure. That's a good boundary. I don't think that you have to be on the front lines of like everyone's initial gut feedback. I think I'll tell you that my feedback is it's super impressive that for you and your team to be so bold and to say it and to not hide the past and to step forward in the future. And kudos to all of you who stepped out and said, we're going to do this and we're just going to suck it up and take it on the chin.
Yeah, I think, in this season too of like, nothing could be worse than taking on QAnon at this point. Like,
how has your look? I was debating about whether or not I was even going to bring up that word. Obviously, I have so many, but how are you doing with all of that? I have lots of feelings about it, but you go first.
It's died down for the most part now, but when we first posted kind of our, we posted like how QAnon is damaging to the anti-trafficking movement, and that was where we had a lot of negative feedback from primarily non-Dressember community members.
Sure,
so a lot of people, I think, were like, someone found it and shared it to their story and encouraged everyone to come challenge us, and then there were some kind of weird personal attacks in there on me, which, I mean, again, they're not valid. I think when you really lean into the discipline of how to handle feedback, it's like the mean and not valid comments are almost entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
So that shows me I'm in a good place with that. But yeah, it's wild. It's super wild, and a little bit scary, because I don't doubt what that community is capable of doing if they decided to mobilize against us. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll just say that I have been praying for your organization as it pertains to that. As I was reading through the comments, I just thought to myself, this just seems incredibly unnecessary. Like, and that we live in a world today where we have to have these kind of, it almost feels like we have to make a statement on social media about something once a month or once a week, or, I mean, it's got to be insane. And so, one of the other questions I wanted to ask you is about compassion fatigue. How do you stay in a place where you're still rooted to your mission, especially in your role? I would guess that one of your job descriptions is to be the voice of, and to be the kind of the face of Dressember, and I've read that you're an introvert. And so that's got to be extremely uncomfortable already. Like, how do you stay rooted to what's important?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I mean, it is definitely a blessing that I very rarely feel a lack of compassion for the people we serve, or like the, compassion fatigue or the exhaustion. Although, I mean, we went to India a couple years ago, and I came back just super overwhelmed, and had to have a few counseling sessions to kind of work through. Like, I mean, that trip made me feel like we were putting a Band-Aid on an open artery, just learning about the systemic and cultural misogyny of India, and the colorism, racism within a race that exists there, and justifies and upholds this like flourishing system of exploitation. That was super hard. So counseling is the way that I, if I feel that fatigue, that's how I deal with it, and kind of recenter, like, okay, I can't help everyone. We can't help everyone. We can't save the world. And that's not what we are trying to collaborate and bring others into this, and help as many people as we can. And that's important. If we can help one person, then that's enough, it matters.
Sure.
And then I think what as an introvert, the hardest part for me is kind of compassion for the critics, or the kind of uninformed people who are very vocal in
Sure.
this conversation.
Can I just tell you that you do a great job, as you've clearly done a lot of interviews, because you do a fantastic job of saying what you mean without being so blunt that it could come across as evil, right? Like, or as like basically what I hear you saying is, I have very little patience for people that don't matter. Right. To our mission, but you said it in such a better way than that. So kudos to you.
Oh, thanks, Tony. Yeah, you learn to be diplomatic in a role like this. I think, like, never interested in a career in politics, but sometimes I feel like I could go that route if I needed to from a articulation standpoint. Yeah. I don't know. Does that answer your
Yes,
your
it
question?
does.
Was there
It
more?
does.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I sidetracked us a little bit on that. It was a really perfect answer, and I imagine is important to stay in your rhythms, and I think that's important for all of us. So 7 years in, $10 million, incredible things. What have you learned about God in the last 7 years through this organization? I'd be really interested in hear about that. How has your faith life changed in this process?
I think the biggest thing, the most personal thing for me is I have seen redemption in action. I've seen my pain and my, my experience of sexual abuse was just a great source of shame for me for most of my life.
Yeah.
And to see that totally turned on its head, that it's easy for me to talk about now, that it's liberating for others to hear me talk about, and that it would compel me into work that is helping so many people is just incredibly beautiful and incredibly redemptive. That, the way I see it, God used this awful, painful experience to bring such beauty and freedom to me and to so many other people. That's like the biggest and
I love that.
coolest thing, I think.
Well, and I think God specializes in redemption, and I think that's an incredible testimony to your story and to what you're doing, and I know that we're all very appreciative of that. What does the next season of Dressember, when you begin to think about 2020 or 2021 or the next 5 years, what are the things that you think and pray about as it pertains to this movement? And how can we be praying too? Because I know a lot of my listeners would mostly identify as Christian and they're prayer warriors. And so a lot of them would love to pray for you and for your organization. What are some of the things that they can be praying about?
Yeah, I thank you for asking that. I appreciate that. I think, the next 3 to 6 months has been on my mind a lot.
Sure.
as a leader and leading a team here. We 90% of our funding comes in December. So we have been fine. We most of that goes to resourcing our partners, and then we retain a very small percentage to operate our team and keep the lights on and make sure people are eating. But we spread that throughout the year. And so now we are really about to see the impact of COVID on the campaign, and this being an election year, and anything that might go on with the economy or the stock market in the next couple of months. All of that has a direct impact on giving and fundraising, and then with all of the very important racial justice conversations we're having, there's just a lot going on, and so we are anticipating a hit to our numbers, that we might see lower participation, lower giving, And we can weather that to an extent. But I think because I'm someone who, like, strategic thinking is kind of my wheelhouse. And so for months I've been thinking ahead to like, plan B, C, D, and E, where, depending on how things go, where or who is going to have to take the heat on some of that. So that's a tough spot to be in. And it's a fairly new experience for me because, fortunately we've just continued to grow until potentially this year. So all our goals are just to plateau from last year. Like, okay, if we can hit the same numbers, that would be great. And we would be fine. At the same time, when you look at trafficking and some of the early statistics that are coming out during COVID, it is a dire and urgent situation. Like, I'm telling our community, or we're communicating to our community, that this is not the year to sit out. Like, as overwhelmed as you might feel, okay, on the one hand, we have a lot of compassion and empathy for anyone who's going through financial trouble, unemployment, or, people have lost loved ones during this season to COVID or to other causes and can't even grieve their death in the way that we would normally do with the community and a big service or anything like that. So for those of us who are doing okay, like we've not lost our jobs, we're not grieving losses of other sorts, or maybe we are, but we feel energized through that to advocate for others in vulnerability. This is a critical time for those who can and want to step up to do so. Because traffickers are not sheltering in place. They're not taking a break. Right. They are adapting to the market. They are absolutely recruiting children through social media and through other online outlets, with children spending so much time online. A lot of the demand is moving online for like customers as well. There's been a huge surge in pornography use over the last 6 months because everyone's home. And so when that demand surges, the supply traffickers, meet the demands with supply. So yeah, just the early statistics we have are from the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And there's been like, a 80% increase in likely sex trafficking situations reported. There's been a 50% increase in the number of calls for emergency shelter, a 40% increase in crisis situation calls. So if someone calls and they need immediate assistance, either from law enforcement or medical assistance, or, they are in crisis, they need some sort of service in the next 24 hours. So all of these numbers are just spiking. And most of those numbers are just from the first 8 weeks of sheltering in place. So there's still a lot we don't know about the impacts of this season. But it makes sense because when you look at a crisis that has made all of us vulnerable in some way, people who had been in vulnerability before this crisis are just made exceptionally vulnerable. So even kind of on the other end of the trafficking spectrum of work with survivors, a lot of the survivor clients that our partners work with had been working in retail jobs or restaurant jobs. And so 80% of them are unemployed or working reduced hours. And so for the first time, we did an off-season fundraising cycle back in May, and were able to provide cash assistance to survivors in crisis. Something we've never done, but it was just, that's where the need was. And we were helping primarily individuals with children. And yeah, these survivors they don't have the safety net that we have. So many of us, we would have 10 places we could go to before we ever found ourselves living in our car or homeless. and we have savings, we have the wherewithal to access unemployment, or, just all the resources that might exist to us. It's challenging for people who, again, might be immigrants to this country or just facing other challenges.
I think that's really important. And one of the things that we've been talking about a lot is that prolonged stress turns the cracks in our lives into canyons. And I was in the military for a number of years, and that was something that we experienced on deployment. And COVID has kind of become the deployment that America never really wanted. And so, or the world rather, never even wanted. So I think that that's really important to think about. People who were already dealing with pretty big canyons, now it must feel like different continents. And so there's a lot to pray for there for sure. And to do something about, because there's opportunities to do stuff. So I know that my friends and my listeners are going to want to connect with you on the interwebs. Where is the best place for them to start to learn more about you and more about Dressember?
Yeah, I mean, Instagram is probably our main channel. So Dressember on Instagram, or I'm on there, Blythe Hill. Our website is full of resources. We really consider it our role not only to provide a way to fundraise, but also to really equip people with resources and reliable data around this issue so that people can feel really comfortable. We're giving people a language to talk about an issue that not everybody wants to talk about. So giving people access points to the conversation through ethical fashion, or, we have an ethical fashion directory on our site. We have a blog with, at this point, probably thousands of articles that you can just search by keyword if you want to look at a specific issue within trafficking. And then we also have a whole fundraising toolkit with ready to share social media graphics, 31 days of statistics, templates for, inviting your community to be part of the impact you want to make through your campaign, all sorts of stuff on there.
Yeah, absolutely love it. And we'll link to all that in the show notes. And if you're in the Centerville area and you want to get on a team, I know my wife would love to have you on hers. She's getting excited. We're all getting excited about the upcoming Dressember season, and I'll be wearing my ties. So, we're going to get it done. I always like to ask people one final question, and it's an advice question, right? So if you could go back to the very first time you put on a dress, December 1st, and you could talk to that younger version of yourself, what advice would you give her?
Just to clarify, is this the first time I put on a dress for the style challenge, or the first time I put on a dress for the campaign?
Either way you want to answer it.
I don't think I'd tell myself anything the first time I put on a dress, because that might have, there's this, I don't know what the exact expression is, but like, we wouldn't do half the things we do if we realized how much work it actually is.
Right.
So, sometimes it's good to be naive. So the first day of the campaign, probably just hang on. I don't know. Yeah. But if we're talking to other people who might be on day one of their journeys, I think there's a lot to be said for small beginnings, where we want to jump to the big, exciting success right away. And, most success stories are 10 years of small steps.
It takes a really long time to become an overnight success.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Well, I thank you so much for being so generous with your time today, and for the work that you're doing and how you're inspiring so many people. And I just deeply appreciate it from the bottom of my heart.
Thanks, Tony. No, I had a great time chatting with you.
What an amazing conversation with Blythe. I'm so thankful for her heart, her intentionality, the way that God has used her to lead such an important movement. Don't forget, you can join. There's still plenty of time to get signed up before December 1st. Be a part of my wife's Dressember team. You can also start your own Dressember team if you want to get engaged that way. So many different ways to serve, and just be reminded that a dress or a tie can change the world. I'll be wearing bow ties and ties throughout December to support my wife. You can see all of that on my social media, Instagram specifically at TWMilt. If you want to contribute, all the links will be up there and in the show notes. So we're excited to be on this journey with you. As always, I'm incredibly thankful that you give us the opportunity to share these messages, that you give us the opportunity to connect with you. And every time you leave a rating or review, it helps more and more people find us. We're trying to get to 100 ratings by the end of the year. So if you can do anything to help us today with that, I greatly appreciate it. Do that on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you so much. Look forward to connecting with you guys real soon.